Wake the dead.
Wake the dead! Wake the dead!
With Sean McCann. Greetings and welcome to Wake the Dead. Today we have returning guest Jerry Marzinsky. Jerry has had 40 plus years in psychology and counseling, and he has discovered the auditory hallucinations of schizophrenics are not hallucinations. They have repeatable patterns, and you can learn more about those that information from our previous episodes with Jerry on Wake the Dead. You can find him at jerrymarzinsky.com, and I am very delighted to have you with us today, Jerry. Thank you. Hello.
All right, you're welcome. So, again, one of the I don't know what you'd call it, accusations, but I seldom tune into the comments after I do it.
It's tough
show.
Sometimes, people,
because I'm overwhelmed with what I'm dealing with, and let alone trying to answer some of these. But I watched an interesting squabble between two of my subscribers, and one goes, "Oh, I'm tired of hearing the same stuff over and over again. Why don't you move on to something new?" And another guy jumps in and he's defending me. There's plenty there, that I'm like chuckling about. But the guy who made that accusation, it is true. I mean, I wanted to make sure the basics were out.
Right.
I've lost track of how many interviews I've done with everybody. I mean, I got a whole giant notebook full of them, so I don't remember who I did with what.
Right.
With the new ones coming on, I usually present the same stuff to make sure they got the basics. But with you and a number of others, I can move on to there's plenty there.
Yes.
there's plenty more there. You
40 plus years of your experience.
You go down the rabbit hole. I mean, half of these notebooks behind me are clinical cases. So, I had one sitting out that I was kind of looking through for a presentation, and you mentioned, well, hey, let's go there for a while.
Yeah.
So I pulled it up. So this is a prisoner. It was on 9/11 in 2002, I believe, that I was
interesting date.
Seeing this guy, and I was telling you earlier that I can't remember. I mean,
it's tough to remember normal things, but this is
so. When I was doing these, I knew they'd come in handy at some point, and I can't do this with anything else in my life. But if I wrote down what was being said word for word within 24 hours of seeing a patient who was interesting, I would remember it line for line. What he said, what I said, what he said, what I said. And I can't do that with anything else. Nothing. I can't even remember where I leave my phone half the time. So it made no sense to me that I could do this. But there were times where I went, I'm busy right now. I'm not going to do it. And boy, big chunks of it started disappearing after 24 hours.
Right.
So
it's important.
I was aware of that when I saw this fella. Now he was in the prison, and he was again reincarcerated. He was released. He was working as an electrician. He started using drugs again, and the voices came back. So he had gotten rid of them for a while by turning to Christ and talking to his guardian angels and getting on a positive spiritual path and staying there.
Right.
But then when he started using the drugs again, they came back.
It was an invitation almost. Was it meth by chance? We talked about that before.
He was using all kinds of stuff. I remember he was using heavy doses of cocaine.
Yeah.
For one, but he was using all kinds of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So here's him talking. He says, when I got out of prison on a previous incarceration, I went nuts with the women, prostitutes, everything. Even after being arrested and sent to prison for a second time, I still wasn't sure what my problem was. When I got to prison, I met Walt, the outside prison chaplain. He called out the demons and challenged them. The demon never came out or showed itself, but the preacher said for it to get lost, as Jesus Christ was coming into my life. He said, I felt this inner peace. It had left. I felt this internal calm and inner peace like I'd never felt before. I also found some books the chaplain gave me. The book said, Jesus has given me the strength to be strong enough to turn to him. I'd like to share this with you. The book was released by From Bondage by Neil T. Hill, or Neil T. Anderson. He's a minister and a psychologist. Said much of the ministry doesn't know how to deal with this stuff. He says it's a spiritual battle. Then he says, I think my voices are demons. He said, I've had them since I was a boy. Prayer has helped.
Have you met him before he got reincarcerated?
No.
No.
No,
Okay.
this was on, I think what I had was at this time I had two inmates in there talking with them. So there's another one with the initial RF, and he responds. He said, "Yes, they're like a pack of wolves attacking from all directions," referring to the
voices.
The voices.
Right.
And then R says, "I know prayer helps, though." So RF says, I sought all the right avenues in life. I had a great job, a good education, and a good salary. But I opened up the gates of hell when I started using drugs. He said, marijuana is okay, but the others are the royal road to the demons. I was trying to self-medicate, trying to deal with the voices and my issues. I've done cocaine, speed, and it opened up the floodgates. R says, yes, I agree. The drugs are a bad scene. I've used plenty of them. They are everywhere. It was a downhill road once I started on the stuff. RF says, the Bible has answers. I had a hard time as a kid. I lost my parents early. R said, how'd they go? RF said, they had us late in life. My dad had a stroke. I feel guilty that I wasn't around to help him when he had the stroke. I was out cruising. R says, my mother died and is working at the front office. She is my guardian angel. RF says, and both these guys were hearing voices.
Yeah.
I used to think the voices were guardian angels. They knew stuff I never could, but they were the guardian angels of hell. So this is one of the things the voices do. I mean, they come in, they said, oh, we're your guardian angels, or we're Christ, or we're some spirit that can really help you out. They know stuff that the person doesn't know. Once they get their trust, they turn on them.
Right. And that's common. That reminds me of ritual magic and contacting non-corporeal entities. I know I brought it up before in our other discussions, but the ritual magicians, there's this one called the Abramelin, where you do this ritual for like a month and you finally get to meet your guardian angel at the end. And is that really a guardian angel, or is it a demon? And the book or the ritual tells you, yes, it's a good thing, it's a guardian angel. So when you meet this thing, you trust it, you love it, and maybe they say that Lucifer is blackness, but he's bathed in light. He looks like light, but inside it's black. So I just wanted to bring that up because
it's clear that the guardian angels are out there, but then they seldom speak to the person unless they're on the verge of death. Otherwise, they communicate with feelings and intuition.
Right.
And I've seen that in the ER. I spent my last 10 years working in the ER before I went into private practice. And, these people who were drug in there, there were so many of them that should have been, by all logical processes, dead.
Yeah.
I mean, what they did should have killed them, and they're still alive.
Yeah.
And they were instantly believers in guardian angels.
Right.
After that.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, you can tell that the guardian angel is healing them, trying to help them. Whereas in this other situation, the guardian angel is saying, like when they take drugs and they meet this entity, it's saying, I'm good. You can trust me. I'll give you all these good things. I'll like show you information that you can't know, and I will, help
And they
you.
do it. They do
Right.
it.
Right. But in order to get the will of the living who is inflicted, they give the gift of, we spoke about one gentleman who was shown where there are cannabis fields,
Yeah.
and he went, and it was
This
a
is
gift.
this guy.
Yeah. Oh, it's the same one.
It's the same one.
Wow.
This is the man who did that, where they showed him that. This is
Wow.
the earlier days when I started working with him.
Right.
So he was still struggling with the voices. So what he did is, the first time he went to prison, he turned back to Jesus and got on a positive spiritual path,
Hmm.
and got rid of them until he started using drugs.
Right.
So he started using drugs. He lost control of his life. He ended up back in prison again. And I'm talking to him now that the voices have come back, and they were stronger this time.
Huh.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, same thing with drug addiction. Like when you quit for a while and then you go back, it's like more powerful.
More potent.
Yeah, the addiction, um so so this guy, he got some books from the chaplain. Chaplain's like, make room for Jesus, and then is it helping him?
Well, yeah, it was helping him, on the first time, the
Yeah.
first time around. So
Okay.
the second time he's coming in, and they're worse. The voices are worse because he
Hmm.
went back to the drugs and he got locked up again.
Right.
Um, and so here's a meeting on 10/1/2002, where he comes in. He says, "I'm having a hard time this week. The voices have been plaguing me for uh, 2 to 2.5 hours a day." So that's down from when I started with him.
Interesting.
They were
It
bothering
was
him.
like 5 and now it's
Well,
2.5.
yeah, right.
Okay.
So it's down to 2.5. The voices don't like it. So he's one of the guys that I had on my caseload that I made a deal with. You tell me what the voices are saying in real time while we're sitting together, and I'll do everything I can to help you out. You know,
Awesome.
um, so we had kind of like a bargain because a lot of them didn't want to talk about the voices.
Right.
But I always had maybe 7 or 10 who were willing to do that, and I would work with them more intensely than the others.
Right.
So I asked him, "Well, what are the voices telling you?" He says, "They're saying that they're going to hurt me if I don't get back into bed with them and let them back 24 hours a day like they were." So
Gee.
here the voices are threatening him. You let us back in, or
Wow.
we're gonna do something to you.
Wow. So it
So
still takes his compliance to be let back in. There is
well,
a barrier for them. They can
they're
only attack a little bit right now, but they need him to consent.
well, right. They want him to get out of the way. So he's been resisting them.
Right.
So, the whole time I was working with these guys, I was examining these patterns and looking for things that would interfere with those patterns.
Right.
And I found that the more things that I found that interfere with these patterns, the better these guys were getting.
Right.
So he
Uh,
was using that stuff. He was interfering with the patterns. He's had them down from 24 hours a day all the time. Now they're 2.5 hours
I
a
see.
day. And
So he's using the rubber
right,
band method and the Psalm
yep,
23, and that's how he's keeping them at bay. Right.
right. Yeah,
I see.
all the stuff that I talked about earlier.
Right.
So here they are threatening him. And I asked him, "Is this the first time you've been afraid of them?" And he said, "Yes." They've been talking to each other. So they're carrying on these conversations behind his back.
Wow.
"Oh, we're going to kill you." And we'll figure out, well, how are we going to do it? Well, we're going to do it this way. And he's hearing all
Wow.
this.
Wow.
Nobody else can hear it.
That's got to be
And,
scary. Yeah.
yeah. And I asked him, "What have they been saying?" He said, "They say I'm a fool and say, when are you going to come around?" If he thinks he can do without us, he's sadly mistaken, is what the voices are saying.
Wow.
Now, this is what psychiatry says are hallucinations.
Yeah, how
You
could
know,
that be true? I mean, really?
well, they don't look into this. I
Yeah,
mean, they've just
right.
arrogantly went, the voices are hallucinations because we friggin' say so.
Right, right,
That's it. They've done no
right.
research into this. They
Of
haven't
course.
asked, you know, they'll ask, oh, what are the voices saying? But they're looking to see if the voices are telling them to kill themselves. You know, otherwise they're
And the
hallucinations. You know, once if the patient admits, oh yeah, the voices are telling me to kill myself, psychiatry jumps up like a pig stuck with a hot burner
right,
and throws them on suicide watch, fills them full of drugs, and doesn't let them back out
right.
until they feel no longer suicidal. They
Until
don't
they
want them.
deem they get to choose when you get free or not. You
Right.
don't get to like if you the
No.
prisoner or whatever. And they when they do say, "Oh, you're going to kill yourself," and then they start all those actions cost money to your insurance agency. So like to them when you say you feel suicidal, that's like cha-ching to that.
Well, in the prison, there wasn't any insurance
Oh, okay.
there. They
Right,
would
right, the
just
prison
see
system, right.
what got me is that here they are insisting that the voices are hallucinations until they find out that the voices are telling the guy to kill himself.
Hmm.
And then it all changes.
Then it's
It's
real.
100, then it's
Yeah.
real. It's
Yeah.
180 degrees real. They grab the guy, they throw him on suicide watch, lock him down, fill him full of drugs, and leave him there with the suicide blanket, which is basically
Paper, right.
it's a crappy thing that doesn't keep you warm at all. It's got like
Yeah.
plastic sewn in it so you can't rip it apart
Ugh,
and hang yourself with it, but it's not warm at all. It doesn't wrap itself around you. It's more
no.
rigid, like you're in an envelope or something.
Yeah, and you're
You know,
in it's like a stone cell. I mean, it's not a warm it's not you
no,
don't
no.
have carpeting and a couch,
No, no, no.
Yeah.
There's nothing warm about those cells.
Yeah.
So that's what struck me about that. Yeah, they're hallucinations until the guy decides, you know, the voice tells them the voices are going to kill himself. Then all of a sudden they become very real,
Right.
you know, but that's the only instance.
Right.
So here the voices say they're calling him a fool and ask him, when are you going to come around? Uh, and they say, if he thinks he can do this with, he can do without us, he's sadly mistaken. And then I asked him, I said, they don't have physical bodies, but they have they ever possessed anyone else and convinced them to hurt you? So
Hmm.
that's a question I get lots of time. And yeah, they they can do that. He says yes. In the bathroom that time, I was combing my hair and I splashed water in the guy's face behind me. So what happened was the voices told him he was walking across the prison yard. The voices told him, "Watch out for that guy. He's gonna attack you."
Right.
I mean,
And
this
it
guy,
was true.
yeah. So he was in the bathroom one day. He just took a shower. His head was wet, and he was flipping the water out of his hair backward. Just
Sure.
as this guy walked in the door, and he hit the guy in the face with a bunch of water from his hair, and
Right.
the fight started immediately.
Wow.
So the guy did attack him,
Yeah. So
and
they know the future. I mean, they
well,
don't it seems to be true. And it's as if
and
they
some
don't experience time the same way with
no,
the
no,
demons.
see, that's one thing. They live in a different universe. They don't
Right.
live in the physical universe. They live in the energetic universe. There is no time there.
Right.
There is no space there. There is no matter there. And
Yeah.
matter doesn't affect them. They can go through walls. Those medicines that the psychiatrists are giving them is like pouring Thorazine on top of a magnetic field and expecting it to dissipate.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, they're not in the same universe. Those physical drugs are not going to get rid of these things because they're
Exactly.
energetic entities. They're not physical. So all they're doing is drugging the brain. They're turning
Yeah.
these guys into zombies where they don't care
Right.
about the voices because they're so friggin' drugged up.
Yeah, and it's as if the voices can't even speak to them anymore because they're too dopey to even hear the voices because
W-
it's just damaging the brain, really.
Well, it does do that with long-term use. It
Mm,
does. Now, not to, to not totally detract from the voices, there are people in prison who need to be on those things because you
right.
can't control them any other way. And it's
Yeah.
the same thing with people out in society. There are some that are so dangerous they have to be on these voices or on these
On the
meds because
meds.
there's nothing else you can do with them,
Right.
And a
And
lot
we
of
did.
times there's people that I can't reach unless they're on these meds.
Mm,
Because in
right.
their natural state without those meds, I can't reach them. The voices are too strong and I'm
Right.
being blocked out.
Right. And we spoke with Anon the last time,
Oh, okay, good.
and he described how electroconvulsive therapy did help him. Uh, and a lot of the information that, like, I've got a clip that we can play later. We might split the show into two halves or whatever, but I've got a clip from Scientology, and they are vehemently opposed to electroshock. Well, to psychiatry in general. And so this is like a scathing documentary. And the way that they put it is that there's all it does is damage, and it doesn't cause any benefit. And they also said that the only reason they give them the only reason they sedate the body is because it's easier on the people watching. They don't have to watch them
Oh, oh
flip
no, no,
around.
they
But
have to. No, they have to do
exactly.
that because they will break their bones when the
Yes,
shock comes. They will
exactly.
snap their
Right.
bones.
So it does have a benefit. And
Well,
so
the
this, yeah.
benefit for the most part is temporary from what I've seen.
Mm,
Now it did snap Anon out and get him back on his feet again.
right.
And I've seen it, at the state hospital. They gave 3,000 of those a year, and every
Yeah.
single one does brain damage. The
Right.
neurologist says that even after
Right.
one, he could noticeably see the brain damage.
Right.
And they were given 3,000, and they were given them repeatedly.
Yeah.
You know.
We're definitely going to see that clip because I mean, does have value, but I just wanted to like interject it that the patients do find some sort of calming effect from the drug, and from the, like, it suppresses the
Well,
voices
they
somewhat.
were also using the shock treatments for punishment.
Right.
So
Right.
so it was the attendants who were determining who would
Ugh.
get the shock treatment. If this guy was misbehaving on the ward, they'd tell the psychiatrist, well, he's doing this and he's doing that, and it
Right.
looks like he could use another shock treatment. And then he was lined up for it.
Sick. And
Um,
that reminds me of what the teachers nowadays teachers are allowed to prescribe ADHD medicine to children. And if the
mm,
kids are acting up and they want to punish them in a sense, keep them in line, like, listen, then the teachers are the ones that get to choose, not even a doctor, and then the recommendation goes through, just like the orderly gets to choose if the person gets electroshock.
yeah, that's nuts. I mean, I've seen so many people in the prison who were started off with
Right.
ADHD drugs and become addicted to it.
Yes. And it is
And it just
meth.
moved, and it is meth. And
Right.
they moved up to using meth and went
Right.
crazy and ended up in the prison.
It's such a
So
crime.
it's
And
got
those
to
poor
be.
kids, they can't get away. They're prisoners in school. Like, the schools are built by prisons. They're made to destroy their minds. Like, it's the same as, and they can't be free. And then the parents listen to what the teacher says. Oh, he needs meds. Oh, I guess sure, and then the kid is a total, like, prisoner in his home. And then when he goes to school, and then they even dominate his brain with drugs. It's the same thing as these uh, bedlam institutions that have been around since
Well,
1247.
yeah, it's not all bad.
Mm,
I've seen people who were ADHD who took the amphetamine, the Ritalin, the Adderall, and fell
mhm.
asleep.
Right. Well,
Now,
that
that's the
that is a
reaction to that.
phenomenon. Yeah,
Yeah, that's
some
the
people.
reaction that a real ADHD person will get.
Right.
It calms them down. It has the
Right.
opposite reaction,
I've
and they
seen
can
that.
concentrate. So it does work, but it's being over prescribed.
Right.
It's
And
as if
if they prescribe it to someone who doesn't have the calming, the opposite, because, like, those same people will take heroin and they will go up. They'll get all
yeah.
amped up. I've met these people. Ex-girlfriend that, she would take heroin and clean the house, and then if she took dope, she'd fall asleep. Or, I mean, coke. It was in a bad time of life, whatever. But still, like, I know these people are wired differently, and in my opinion, it doesn't mean that they have ADHD. I just think that that's the drugs affect them differently, and so the psychiatrists are seeking a calming thing. So these people will give them that, it calms them, and other people, they could give them heroin and get the same effect. It's just
Well,
they're wired differently.
no, it not just calms them, but they can concentrate like they never have before.
Mm,
They
right,
can focus their attention
right,
instead of being scattered. You know,
Right.
so
And that's
if it's
true for people that don't have any, like I myself have taken uppers and Adderall, from my friends at school. Whatever, that's another whole topic. But it would help me focus and keep. I would be able to enunciate my words better. I would be like I would feel more in control, and that in
right.
itself was like a drug because it's like it's it's a great feeling to be in total control in the moment. But that goes
Right,
along with addiction. We don't need to talk about that.
and I would ask these prisoners who lost control of it, and say, well, you were taking the Adderall, you were taking the Ritalin, you were feeling as good as you ever have, you were doing good in
Right.
school, you were able to concentrate. Why did you keep upping the dosage?
Right.
And they went, well, I don't know,
Mm.
and so
Because the doctor says so, or because
no,
it
I don't
doesn't
know. They
affect them
did
as
it.
much? Because they
They
want to
did.
keep the high. They want to keep
They want to keep
being
the high.
high. Right. Right.
They keep going, but it's gotten out of control. Like in 2020, the CDC reported 1.2 million suicide attempts,
Oh,
uh,
yeah.
and the drugs they're giving kids. They've got 7.2 million kids are on psychiatric drugs.
Oh my God.
7.2 million.
There's only
622
Yeah, go ahead.
622,723 under the age of 5.
Ugh.
80,235 kids were on ADH drugs or amphetamines.
And it is known, like from brain scans, that it deteriorates your frontal lobe. Those speed meds, they eat away at your frontal lobe. And
Oh, that's news. I didn't
you
know
didn't know
that.
that.
No.
Okay. Well, that is true. Long-term use of methamphetamines, it makes the frontal lobe look like uh, Alzheimer's patient.
Ah,
It shrinks it and it kills the brain cells.
I'll be
So
darned.
yeah, it is a chemical lobotomy in a sense, because it's attacking that same spot with damage. It's just not an ice pick scraping around. And I've got a clip. We can talk about that later. We'll
Yeah,
talk
if you
about the
have
history.
information on that, I'd like to hear it.
Yeah, I
Send it to
will.
me.
I'll definitely. Yeah, I'll send you some more information about that. I'll look up. But yeah, that is something that I picked that up along the way. I don't know exactly where I got that, but
Well,
I'm
I
sure
know it
that's
does
true.
that with antipsychotic drugs. It does that.
Right.
That was a big thing when that came out because the psychiatric mafia and big pharma went nuts.
Yeah.
You know, and
They wanted to
so
cover it up. Right.
they wanted to cover it up.
Right.
So they got 38,534 kids on antidepressants. 85,143 were on brain damaging antipsychotic drugs.
It's like Haldol and stuff. These.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. These are major
Neuroleptic.
drugs.
Neuroleptic.
Neuroleptic
Right.
drugs that kill the brain. They rot the
Yeah.
brain.
Man.
Look at
And
that.
these are kids. Like their
These are
brains
kids.
haven't even developed all the way
No,
yet.
no, 85,000, and this was back in 2017.
This reminds me of eugenics. I mean, have you Brave New World? Have you familiar with that book?
Uh-uh.
The very beginning, it's Aldous Huxley's vision of the future in a structured, ordered society where everybody loves their place in society, and they grow the children from scratch in like a test tube, and they stratify the society where the alphas don't get anything. They get to pass through unharmed. But the betas and gammas and such, like they'll squirt a little alcohol in the embryo, they'll shake it up, they'll try to damage it, and then they have a structured uh like the alphas get no damage, betas get a little bit, down to gamma, and the gammas grow up to be retarded, and they're the ones that are like cleaning up trash, and they're trained with like you and Cameron type mind wipe type uh tactics, that like they're trained. Oh, I'm glad I'm a gamma. I would never want to be alpha. They have to think all the time, and it's so in a sense like these little kids are being damaged by the structured society. They give them this med, they give them that med, and that it damages the brain before they even get to become adults. And then that in tandem with the schooling trains them into being docile slave workers that don't want to get any better in life, that don't like books, and like, and think drugs are good, and like, it's making devolved people in the end by damage. And that's that was written down in the 50s by, or even earlier, I think 30s or something, but Aldous Huxley. And it's almost like a textbook thing for people that are looking into the evils of government, and the MK Ultra and that whole avenue of rabbit hole. Brave New World is integral to understand what their vision of a perfectly structured society of compliant slaves looks like. Yeah.
Well, it looks like the psychiatric mafia is helping that along.
Yes.
This, to sum up, I mean, virtually every single one of the 295 psychiatric disorders in the DSM-5 are made up.
Yes.
They're just made up by a group of psychiatrists, 2/3 of which are linked to big pharma.
Yeah.
In these meetings once every couple of years, they add more. They just make them up out of thin air.
Right.
And then the institutions, the educational institutions, are teaching this like these are real diseases,
Yeah.
oh, these things exist, in reality. And you
And
spot them
the
by
students,
what they say it is. And the students are
they
taught
just
to
accept
look at
it.
this like the Bible. Yeah.
Right. Right.
But one thing is they don't have access to a psychiatric population.
Right.
A lot of these people in school, I mean, I didn't have access to a real psychiatric population until after I finished my master's degree.
Right.
So you can't see what's going on. They've
Yeah.
taken complete control of the entire mental health system, the psychiatric mafia and big pharma. And I never saw a single researcher anywhere on the front lines ever. They wouldn't allow them in. Anybody who tried to, hey, can I come in and talk to some? Oh no, it's too dangerous. We can't risk it. We can't,
Dangerous.
we can't. It's just,
Yeah.
guarantee your safety. I mean, forget it. They won't let them in.
Wow.
You
You're
know?
lucky to have been, working in the prison, because they were more lax and they allowed you to speak to them, and it wasn't such a controlled situation.
Right, right. And I think the psychiatrists are afraid of these people because
Right.
they're being assaulted by schizophrenics at a rate that is astronomical past
Yeah.
what everybody else is. I mean, their
That's right.
assault rate is incredible. And I saw that when I first got to the hospital, and I couldn't figure it out either.
Right.
So, I mean, how you look at the mental health system, it's been taken over by the psychiatric mafia and big pharma, starting off back in 2000 or 1910,
Yeah.
when these, industrialists like J.P. Morgan and the rest of them said, okay, you medical schools, unless you're teaching psychopharmacology, unless you're teaching pharmacology, we're not going to allow you to license your people. We're going to cut off all the grants. We're cut off all the money.
Right.
We won't fund your educational institutions.
Yeah.
So it was at that time that the deep state took over the mental health system, and there was a fight between neurologists and psychologists for a long time, and psychiatrists were losing because they weren't producing any results.
Right. And there's
know?
no proof of what they claim, these things.
No.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this went on, and then once they discovered these antipsychotic drugs in a dye lab in Europe.
Right. Right.
So it wasn't like, oh, they spent millions of dollars
Yeah.
developing them.
Would you like to? I have a clip with the history of where a lot of this came from. Would you care to take a look at that?
Go for it.
Okay.
But I'd also like to summarize the current state of where we are with mental
Yes.
health in this country too, after you show your clip. I
Okay.
mean, it's pathetic. what they call a mental health system here in the Western, in the whole Western world.
Right.
I mean,
It's really
these people
not
have
health.
taken over mental health in the entire Western world.
Right.
And what they're producing, nothing they do cures anything.
Right.
It
Yeah.
temporarily suppresses symptoms.
It's
And they're
about
making
control.
a fortune. It's about control, and
Right.
it's about money. And they're making a fortune. They're making trillions of dollars or billions.
Right. Right.
Billions. I think it was like $47 billion they made one year on psychiatric services and the selling of drugs. And none of those cured anybody.
And they still don't.
And they still don't.
Yeah. And the doctors, if you ask them on the street, they'll say, yeah, we don't cure people.
Oh, no, well, I don't know what they'd say about that.
Yeah, I've got a video of that too. I didn't include it in the clips that I'm going to show, but yeah, there was a man on the street interview with people that were, and there was a conference of psychiatry, and there were all these people milling about on the streets, and they would ask them, hey, what, does this help, or are you healing, or what is, they would explain the DSM and well, we don't really have a test for how, there is no medical test, and they're outright, with it.
There is no kind of test whatsoever to verify any of the 295 diagnoses they have.
Yeah.
There's nothing. They have nothing to validate these.
And the diagnoses grow. And
every year they add more, and they put a number on there so they can bill for bill insurance companies, and then the friggin' deep state pharma comes behind and go, oh yeah, we got a drug for this now, we can treat this. Make it up. They make up the drugs.
The DSM is created by consensus. They just vote on it, and there is no real symptoms. Some of the symptoms are like wetting the bed and medicate them.
No, there's real symptoms, but the thing is, what they're doing is taking the gamut of human behavior, carving it up, and pathologizing the segments.
Right.
And it's all human behavior. They just turned it into a disorder. I mean, I heard they had Southern Bell syndrome in there one time.
Right.
They had mental retardation in there one time.
Yeah.
Transvestism and all that stuff. It was mental illnesses.
Right. And these things, they are shifted. Like at one time, it was like something that was not a problem before is now okay because society has shifted. Like the goalposts are changing, and the DSM is always being revised, and it's getting thicker every year. Like every time it gets revised.
To see how ridiculous is kind of what you said. If people don't want to take that toxic vaccine, the COVID vaccine, here's these nutcases saying, who was it? You said somebody. It was somebody pretty high up.
Right. It was in Ontario. College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario. Here.
For crying! Tell them what they said.
Oh man, yeah. Here, actually, what I'm going to do.
It just warps my head that they would do something like this.
I have a little clip for everyone. All right. So this is a gentleman speaking about the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario.
And you've talked about how even they recommend, perhaps psychiatric medication or something for people that don't want to take a vaccine.
So this has come out recently out of the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario. The college sent out a letter or a memo to all the doctors in Ontario suggesting to them, now so far they're not mandating it, they're just suggesting it, that any of their unvaccinated patients, that they should consider that they have a mental problem and that they should be put on psychiatric medication. So far, it's just a suggestion, but the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario should not be making these kinds of suggestions. This is extremely unethical, and this is a very, very slippery slope. If they're suggesting that people who wish to have bodily autonomy and don't want an experimental vaccine, that there may be something mentally wrong with them, that is a very, very dangerous, slippery slope that we're on.
What
So,
a friggin' bunch of nutcases.
right.
They ought to all be locked up, the whole bunch of them.
Yeah.
If they can do that, they can, and they are using mental disorders against, they make these things up. They say, oh, you're psychiatrically ill, and they lock you up. I mean,
Right.
this is
It's
what they're
control
doing.
and domination.
Control and domination. And
Right.
there's actually a video clip that goes back to the 1950s where one psychiatrist is talking to the UN and saying, yeah, we've taken over the what was it? We've taken over the educational institutions.
Yes.
We've taken over, these things. What were they having trouble with? The churches or something they said they were
Yes.
having trouble with?
Yes. That is the quote. I've seen that quote, or I've heard it. And they said that they've taken over the schools and the medical institutions. Now they're having trouble with churches, and there was one other one to get past, and then they have total control.
Yeah.
That's the idea of dominating the ideas of people. And if you look at Margaret Sanger and that whole thing, and she would employ the church preachers to propagate her ideas of abortion is good, and what kind of preacher is going to tell his flock, like, you should kill your babies? But I mean, it's that kind of total domination of the worldview of the
Yeah.
people in the population.
Yeah, they've taken over the whole Western mental health system.
Right.
Psychiatrists and big pharma have. And
Right.
let's take a look at how they're doing. I mean, they got all these kids on psychiatric drugs. According to the FBI, let's see how we do with it.
Here we go.
24,570 murders took place in the U.S. in 2019.
Wow.
Uh,
And
now,
a lot of
let-
them, a
kinda
lot of these
look-
kids, like
look
they're on drugs.
well, yeah, look at what the mental health system. I mean, okay, so
Right.
these are the results of our mental health system right now. And this is just in the U.S. So these are the results. 24,570 murders in the U.S., and that's in 2019. The murder rate in the U.S. increased by nearly half in 2020 and was one of the largest jumps on record. This is despite the flooding of the market with psychiatry and psychiatric drugs.
Right.
The rise in the murder rate over 2021 exceeded 20%.
Well,
The suicide rate continues to increase. The combined suicide and murder rate equals roughly 71,000 deaths a year. This is your U.S. mental health system at work.
right. Yeah, the lockdowns are working.
Yeah.
The Satanists really want us dead, and I think that's all part of the plan. Like yeah.
Our prisons are overflowing with mentally ill. There's tens of thousands who've turned to drugs to cope. The seriously mentally ill inmates finish his prison term. He's released with $50 and said, okay, go to the nearest ER when you're done. There's little or no rehabilitation taking places in the prisons. There's little or no treatment taking place. And if they do, it's just for show. And these
In order
antipsychotic
to get
drugs,
more money from the government. Right.
these antipsychotic drugs don't do anything to cure any of these patients. Look at this. Look at our society right now. I mean, it's getting worse and worse every year. These
Right.
drugs and psychiatry is not curing anything.
Right.
But
And-
I want to say, there is a new system who's come out. It's called the Mace Energy method that does cure mental illnesses. It goes in there. We can go in there. You can access, and it takes into account the spirit of the person. Takes into account the energetic being that's in there, and that there's a way to get information from that to guide you to where the traumas are, and to dissolve those traumas so they're no longer energetically charged. And you think these bozos have given that a listen? No, they've
No.
written it off.
Right.
It was developed by a ship captain of all people in Australia. He had nothing to do
Interesting.
with psychiatry or psychology. He was like a self-taught guy who was interested in the mind, and he's piecing this all together, and it took him his entire lifetime. They
Wow.
took it to the legislature in Australia, and they blew it off. They took it to one of the educational institutions, and they blew it off. It's almost like we don't want anything that
Right.
works.
It threatens their domination and control that they
I'll
have
tell
already
you.
set into place.
I've
System.
I've been working with this stuff all my life. I've been I've been through college. I've been through graduate school. I've been into the PhD. They don't have anything that works anything like this,
Right.
and they're not about to adopt it.
And this is spelled MACE method.
Mace Energy method. I adopted it for my practice as soon as I saw it. It was like I saw the results it was giving, and it was
Wow.
like, holy cow, look at this. And it happened. It works fast, and it works, easily.
That's
It
interesting.
takes some training, but it actually works. It's not like counseling where you talk to the guy over and, oh, woe is me, and he goes out of there feeling worse than when he came in.
Right, because you're reminded of the trauma, and then there's no resolve. It's
It just triggers, right? It triggers it
Right.
over again, and there's no resolution.
right. How, if you don't mind me asking, could you give us a little brief synopsis of how the treatment is done?
Well, what's so fascinating about it is that the therapist does not have to know what the issue is.
Mm-hmm.
It works anyway. So what John Mace found was that the mind does not work the way that we think it does, or the way we've been taught it does.
Mm-hmm.
The clicker came in when he found that the mind, what it does is it takes pictures of where the attention is focused. So wherever you focus your attention, it takes images of it. And when you focus your attention somewhere else, that image fades and a new image comes up.
I see.
So that's all the mind does. The spirit, or the energetic being, does the rest. It does the thinking. It does the reasoning. It does the planning. It does all the things that we attributed to the mind.
Interesting.
And what he found is that, and this goes into the energetic universe, which he coined the phrase for, is saying there is no matter, there is no time, and there is no space in the energetic universe. So, if you think back on a trauma that happened to you, boom, it comes alive as if it's happening right now.
Right.
So
Yeah.
basically, it's also saying that everything exists right now, including those traumas. So
I see.
what he also found
because
out,
it can be accessed through a field that has through a method that has no time differential. Like once you access that, the memory of the higher self, it can give it to you right there as if it's happening in the moment, because
right,
there
and,
is
and
no
your
time span.
and
in
your
that.
memory is also controlled by the energetic being.
Right.
So the energetic being is perfect. It's energy.
Your higher self.
Your higher self, your spirit, it's
Right.
it's energy. Without it, if that energy leaves your body dies. You're
Is
dead.
dead. Right. It's the
So
animator, what animates us.
it's
Right.
the animator, it's energy. So it belongs
Right.
to the energy universe.
Yes.
So, there is no polluted energy. So if you've got a magnetic field, that's a pure magnetic field. There's
Right.
no faulty magnetic field. There's
Right.
no polluted magnetic field.
You're right.
There's no polluted electricity. There's no polluted gravity.
Right. It's just
all
nature
the-
works this way every time. It is a law, in a sense, like
all
because
these energies are pure, just like your
Right.
spirit is pure. If
Yes.
if something happens to your psyche, it's not due to your spirit. It remains pure. It happens to what's outside of it.
Hmm.
And most of that is controlled by trauma. So what happens is that the spirit is perfect, and these what they call them identities, negative identities, are caused by trauma. So
Right.
when
DID type, the way, but the DID is more extreme. Right.
uh-huh. So when you run into a trauma, your attention focuses on you.
Hmm.
It's like, what did I do to get into this mess? How
Right.
do I get out of it? What do I do about it? And who am I in relation to it? And the
So it
spirit
even changes your
makes
worldview of like
right,
your own self understanding. Right.
right. You make a decision about who you are in that trauma.
Wow.
But what happens? Decisions you make while you're in a trauma or a negative state of being are not good decisions, because they mirror your psychological state when you make them.
Right. And if
Okay?
you're in that trauma, then you are not thinking, you're reacting
No,
to the pain.
yeah, exactly. It's like you put your hand on a hot stove. You don't think about it, you react.
Right.
All right. So you make a decision about yourself, something like, well, I'm worthless, or I'm stupid, or I can't trust myself.
Mm.
And then the ego comes and buries it because it doesn't like to experience that stuff. So it
Mm.
gets buried live, and it affects your behavior from that time on.
Wow.
And it's triggered over and over and over again.
Oh
So
man.
so what John Mace found was that if you can, the mind will make images of concepts and feelings. So if it's got a way for the spirit to lead you to where that trauma is, which took him years to figure out how that is. And once you find the trauma, then you can turn that trauma into an image. And if the attention is focused on it, it will dissipate and the spirit will absorb that energy back into itself.
Oh. It's like
And
bringing
you
it
get
up from being buried by the ego,
yep,
and then that
yep,
allows it to be processed.
right, right. Once you find it. So the problem is that, problems about aren't big issues.
Mhm.
It's the problems you don't know about that are buried in the subconscious
Right.
that are triggering over and over again. And you go, why did I say that? Or
Right.
why did I do that? Or,
Right.
it's like you're out of control of
Because
that
you're
thing.
like hardwired, programmed with
Right.
that trauma.
You're programmed with that trauma, and it just keeps kicking in over and over again. So if you think of somebody you hate, every time that person comes up, there was some trauma in your background that
A reason for
triggers
it.
you when that particular type of person comes up.
Right.
And every time you get stuck with one of those people, that trauma activates,
Right.
and then you switch into another type of person to deal with it.
Right.
So you have a personality that you developed just to deal with these kind of people that irritate the crap out of you.
Yeah.
So you change as a being when that comes around,
Wow.
and then you unleash on these guys to drive them off.
Right.
So
And
if
then
you
with
could get in there and dissolve those feelings, and
right.
you discreate what you created is
Right.
basically what happens. And
That's amazing.
it's amazing how it works. It just
Yeah.
it does more than all these psychiatrists put together.
Mm.
And the system isn't being touted. I mean, it's
Wow.
they're just ignoring it.
It makes total sense because of from what I've learned about SRA and how trauma affects our brains. And what you're telling me is connecting all these dots in my mind of like, incomplete knowledge. I mean, the way that the SRA creates dissociative identity disorders, and those personalities are created to protect the core self from further trauma. And when they're traumatized as kids, it locks in these traits that are accentuated through different forms of trauma. If they're trying to make a kid be a perfect soldier or something when he grows up, then they'll beat him with another kid in the room, and they'll say, this will only stop when you beat up that person. And then they're like, no, I don't want to hurt another, but eventually they do. And then and that when they come into a situation where it's me or them, I have to hurt them, it's instinctual, it's part of their core personality. And it makes me think of circumcision. I mean, it's a big topic with what I talk about on my show. And that core trauma, it happens before we're even like it's our first week of life. And it happens to all the males in the society, and what it does to our brains as we get older. That trauma and then it's so buried that we don't even recognize it's trauma. And then we do it to our own kids, and then it happens
Yeah,
generationally.
it goes generation after generation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And those are those negative identities that get buried in your personality and are activated under certain circumstances.
Right.
They destroy your life. They ruin your life.
Totally. I mean, I was doing the show about I did an episode on my show about circumcision, and as I was doing it, my hands were curling up. I was like, I couldn't breathe. I had to stop and go walk the dog and come back to it. It was really hard for me, and I recognized that it is one of those deep traumas within me, and like I'm looking at it, I'm like, this is what happened, and now that conscious understanding is hard for me. My body doesn't want it, and it's like reacting against I wasn't trying to shake,
Right.
and you know
So it's the same kind of thing with affirmations. You keep repeating that affirmation over and over and over again, but as soon as you stop repeating that, the old behavior
Right.
takes place.
Yeah.
Because it's programmed in there. You have to deprogram it
Right.
to get rid of it. And these drugs that they are dousing society with don't get rid of anything.
No.
They just turn you into, drug-infused morons. They don't cure anything.
Right.
You
Right.
know? And neither does traditional counseling. This is, MACE is the first thing I've seen that actually works. I mean, it actually works, and it works quick.
Wow.
It's
I'm
and
so
they're just
glad that
blowing it off.
I'm so glad that you briefly mentioned it in our last show, and I love that you were able to explain it for us, because that's when I heard it last time. I was like, yeah, I want to know that. I want to learn that. And
I
my
tell you,
fans too, or my listeners at least. I got a couple comments like, "What MACE? What? Huh?"
yeah,
And
Mace Energy method.
that's
There's books
wonderful.
on it out there about it. I didn't believe it myself when I adopted it for my practice. I'm watching this like boom, 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 boom. These people are changing right before my eyes.
Wow.
Now with schizophrenics, these voices feed on the trauma. So the voices can go into they're energetic beings. They're in the physical or in the energetic universe, like John Mace says. Just like these voices, they can go in there. They can pick out every rotten thing you ever done and throw it in your face
Right.
until you turn negative. And once they turn your emotional state negative, then they can drain your energy.
Huh.
So what Mace can do, it goes in there and it deals with those traumas. So if you get rid of them one after the other, after the other, after the other, these things start starving to death, especially if the patient is taught what these voices actually are and how they operate.
Right. And then they can consciously work to fight them.
They can consciously work to fight them. Now, they can't use the Mace system on themselves because you can't be in two places at the same time. You can't be aware of yourself in the Mace system and be outside of that system
Right.
at the same time.
Taking notes and, leading.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
It's like, trying to discover a whole car, but you only can see it from the inside. But you can use it on friends and family. And there's enough information in the books to basically, it's just basic information, but it works.
Yeah. Can the listeners contact you or find more information about this from your website, jerrymarzinsky.com? Do you?
I know I have it. I have my practice listed, but I
Good.
didn't write
So they can
anything on it
contact you
before.
if they seek to have practice with you. They can contact you there.
Yeah, I'm kind of backlogged, but I'll get them in at some point.
Well, God bless you. Thank you.
I'm scheduled to past the middle of December at this point, but I usually find a place if somebody cancels or something happens.
Yeah.
I'll usually try to squeeze them in there. But they can look up the Mace Energy method. It was developed in Australia, and there's Sherry Hatfield is the chief trainer for that. So those of you who are working in the psychology field or counseling field and see that what you're doing isn't working, go read John Mace's Energy Over Mind.
Energy Over Mind. Is that a book? That's the book?
It's a book. And the second one is Causism.
Energy Over Mind
and
Causism, written by John Mace.
This stuff really works. It really helps people. It's not like what they taught you in school where you reflect feelings and you use all these different systems that these therapists have come up with that they say works. The bottom line, they don't work. I mean,
right.
In the prisons, the recidivism rate, even though these guys are going to mental health centers when they get out, The recidivism rate is 50 to 70% recidivism.
Well,
They're not helping these
yeah,
people.
that's actually better than the common recidivism in regular prison. I mean, that's like 96%. Like really, just normal
It's
prisoners, they
really
always go
high.
back. It's almost they always go back.
Yeah, and some of them go back on purpose because they can't cope with life outside. So they'll
Right,
go in and they rob a bank and they wait for the cops to come and
right.
get them.
Or they steal a candy bar. I mean, whatever
Yeah,
it is, like they just try to get in the, because they can't
they
do
can't cope.
bills, they can't, go to work and all that.
Right. It's
They're
like a different
children.
world than when they went in. They
Right,
can't cope with it.
right. Yeah. So this is that. Thank you so much for sharing about the MACE method. That's infinitely valuable information, and I'm so glad that I could have that here recorded. Um, so the common way, like that's how to heal, right? But what they've been doing for all of, since 1247, when Bethlehem Hospital opened in London, has been control and separating out the people, the undesirables, the lunatics, and the people with syphilis, and the people that they can't. In those times, the families were in charge of taking care of crazy people, like in quotes, sorry, crazy people. I hope that's not a derogatory for the listeners, but they, and they would end up just being on the streets begging for money, and Bethlehem Hospital was created to house these people, and it wasn't like a nice place to go. I've got some video that maybe we could watch together, and like when you want to say something, just speak up and I'll pause it and we can discuss the history of psychiatry and how it has completely dominated.
Well, it completely dominated because those drugs allowed them to control massive populations of hospitalized patients with
Yes.
less staff than they ever had to use before.
Yes.
So they
Yes.
didn't. The attendants did not have to fight these guys and stuff them into straitjackets where people were getting hurt right and left when they had to bring them under control physically because they
Right.
get supernaturally strong. Those of you who work in prisons, I mean, they get supernaturally strong.
That's interesting. And that happens with drug use too. Like people that are on Sherm, or what, I guess it's like not formaldehyde, but they take this God, I forget what it is. But anyway, where they like fight 8 cops and they throw them against the
Oh
walls.
yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
they're just so
Right.
infinitely strong. It's interesting how this
The word bedlam is defined as a place or
is that too
situation
loud?
of chaotic uproar,
Here, I'll
and
turn
where
it down a little
confusion prevails. An insane person, a lunatic, a madman, or a lunatic asylum, a madhouse. The word is a corruption on the word Bethlehem, which itself is a corruption of the biblical word Bethlehem, and it is derived from the Bethlehem Royal Hospital in Beckingham, on the edge of London, which has been around in one form or another since the year 1247. Originally a stone construction consisting of roughly 20 small rooms, the first Bethlehem Hospital housed what were at the time referred to as lunatics, words whose origins date back to early French and Latin, with the prefix of luna relating to the moon, and the suffix atic, which is a connection to the nature of the thing being specified by the prefix. A modern example would be the word problematic, in which the attic is in reference to the word problem, which is the subject that the word.
Sorry, it starts off a little slow, but it'll pick it
Around the
up.
belief that madness was in some way connected to the monthly phases of the moon. But
And
at
it
this
is.
time, lunatics were
Right.
not just
Right.
people who were suffering from what we would today refer to as mental illness. They could be queer people, people with deformities, people with other types of illnesses that were not at this time understood, such as those with syphilis or mercury poisoning, epileptics. It was a building to put away and hide those who would be considered undesirable, different, or socially unacceptable.
And that's kind of the same as it is today, if you ask me. I mean, at the modern prison where they lock up the mental patients, is just the same as it's always been. Do you agree?
Well, there's yeah, there's
Yeah.
there's some in the maximum security units that they can't control. They need those drugs to
Right.
keep them under some kind of control.
Right.
But right now, the private psychiatric hospitals are like a drug fueled merry-go-round. They come in there, they go off their meds because of the horrible side effects.
Right.
They go nuts. They come back into the hospital. They're rehospitalized. They're put back on the meds again. They're let loose.
Right.
Nothing really's changed. They haven't affected anything other than drugging them up, and then they go off the meds again. And they just keep coming in over and over and over again. I've seen this so many times. The same person just comes in once every couple of months. They go off their meds and they come back in again and over and over. And each time the psychiatric mafia and big pharma are making a fortune. They're making tens of thousands of dollars. I mean, just, and the insurance companies are paying this over and nobody's being cured.
Right.
Nobody is being cured.
I'll tell you, I have a good friend that I've known for many years. We were friends in high school, and he went, in quotes, crazy every year in the summertime, and they would institutionalize him, and he would call up me at work. He'd be like, "Sean, save me, get me out of here." And I'd be like, "How? Okay," and then I would learn that he signed himself in. And like, he's stuck there and there's nothing I can do. And he's like, and it eventually, like, he started as a loving, caring person that wanted to do well in the world towards people. He wanted to help and, share. And the last time I saw him, he didn't care about anybody or anything. He wanted 10 motorcycles. He wants to have all the houses, and he wants to be super rich. He ended up working for Northrop Grumman, building the F-35 that's bombing Gaza, and I told him, "You're helping to bomb children." And he says, "I don't care." He said that. So I was like, wow. And it's, the years of medication. He would have, like, he stayed over on the couch one night at a party, and he had in a sandwich bag, it was like 2 fingers of pills just for one dose at night. And I'd be like, "What is that?" And he'd be like, "This one counteracts that one. That one makes me high. That one does this." And he said, "It's a keg party in my mouth." And he guzzles it down with beer. And I was just like, whoa. And this is at the time when he would say things like, "I'm underground right now. I'm like bin Laden. I'm underground." And this was like after 9/11, whatever. And I'd be like, "What do you mean?" And I would have him explain it. Everybody else would be like, "He's crazy. Get him away from me." I'd be like, "Dude," I'm not saying his name, "Dude, what do you mean?" And he would explain that he buried all his possessions underground in the woods. And I'm like, "Oh, you're underground. I get it." And he wants to, like, the way that it is just being poetic, I guess, by relating it to bin Laden. And other people see that and they're like, "Oh, you need meds. Check, Haldol, okay, all the neuroleptics, go ahead." And then he would complain about what it did to him, and he would always go off his meds. And
they're horrible. They're horrible.
Yeah, right.
So, they don't take into account the spiritual being that people are.
Right.
Psychiatry doesn't do it. Big pharma doesn't do it. So psychiatry and psychology don't do it. Social workers don't do it.
Right.
And it's not taught in the school. The big difference with Mace is it takes into account the spiritual being and works with it, which none of these other things do.
Right.
And, so I've been searching all my life. I mean, I go undergraduate school, maybe there's some answers there, behavior modification, that worked, then getting the master's degree. Okay, they're hiding the information there. It wasn't there, there, Roger's stuff, reflecting back feelings and stuff that was useful, but it wasn't 2 years worth of useful.
Right.
And then I go, they must be hiding this in the PhD programs. So I got into a PhD program where they take like 1 out of 1,000 or something. I don't even know how I got in there.
Wow.
I waited for 2 years for something to come up that was useful and worthwhile. And it was just, oh, memorize the DSM. It's the Bible. You need to know all these diseases. And I'm like, what? Yeah, you
Right.
do what we say, not what you do what we say. And answering questions, they didn't like to be questioned. They did not like to be questioned.
Right. Because
You
it's a
know,
religion. They, they have dogma, and if you shake that house of cards that they built it on, then
oh, it was
shame on you, right?
yeah. I couldn't, because I was asking questions all my life. So I'm start asking them questions, and it's, you know,
Right. Because you
they,
care.
boy, they didn't like it. They
Yeah.
did not like it.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were biting each other's backs. I mean, they were at each other's throats.
Right.
There were a few that weren't. I mean, there were a few decent, but boy, the I remember one day where all of the second year students were called into to a meeting with the head of the department,
Yeah.
and here he is teaching us how to lie with statistics. And I'm I'm no statistical genius, but I've had several courses under my belt. And I raised my hand and I said, "Well, yeah, how do you get away with presenting the end 5% of the population as if it's the entire population?"
Mhm.
Which is what he was doing. And I'll never forget his response. He said, "If they don't know enough about statistics to catch it, that's their fault." And I
Ugh.
was like shocked. I mean, I was like, "What?
Satanic. That's just
What?"
evil.
And
Yeah.
and I looked around to the rest of the students, and every single one of them was kind of going, "Oh, so that's how it's done." And, and I looked at
Jesus.
my friend Tom next to me, and he was as shocked as I was, and we were looking at each other like,
Yeah. Wow.
and then we had to snap off before he saw us looking at each other like going, "What?" you know?
Yeah.
No, it was,
That's sick.
and it's, I'll tell you, they did some research on the number of research articles that psychologists publish. Over 80% of them could not be replicated. So
Right.
they're publishing garbage because
Right.
in the educational institutions, it's publish or perish. So they don't
Yeah.
care what they publish as long as they put out something.
Oh,
You know,
wow. And so it's not repeatable, and it's basically just to further
It's garbage.
they have in their mind what they want to find, and so they structure
Well,
the
it's worse.
system.
It's worse than that. I remember when they wanted me to do a research project, and I'm going, well, I'd like to look into depression. That's pretty common. And I did the research, and it was like they broke into different camps, none of which solved anything. And I said, well, there's already tons of research on this, these aspects. And I remember the professor says, well, just do another one and add to the list. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
you
None of
know,
it really matters to
none of it
them.
really matters as long as you get the publication.
Right.
So
And that and with the other guy saying if they don't know statistics how to figure out that's their problem, that's occultism right there. They're
and,
hiding information that is very necessary for people. And that occulting of that information gives a power differential where the doctor is the one who knows the truth and you can't even figure it out.
that's what it is with psychiatry. We're the
Right.
doctors. We know what this is, and they don't. They keep saying, "Oh yeah, we know what we're the mental health experts." They have
Yeah.
no idea. You
Right.
start looking into the voices like we were reading earlier. They have no idea. They won't do that.
Right.
They're afraid to do it, and they're being attacked by schizophrenics at a horrendous rate. I have the statistics here somewhere.
It's
Assaults on
like double.
psychiatrists.
Right. Yeah.
I noticed that when I was at Central State,
Mm,
we would all meet in they didn't have cell phones then, so the grapevine was the information got around, and
sure.
the center for the grapevine was the central kitchen where everybody ate, because in Milledgeville at that time there weren't. I mean, it was just a small town.
Yeah.
There weren't any restaurants except for one mom and pop thing. So I noticed that the psychiatrists were being beat up at a rate higher than anybody else. The psych nurses, psychologists, the assault rate was as high for psychiatrists as it was for attendants that spent 24 hours a day with these people, and they were
Right.
only spending 20 minutes a month.
Right.
So it boggled me. It's like, what's going on? Why are these guys getting the crap kicked out of them at such a high rate when they're hardly ever around these people? you know?
Yeah.
So I did a little research on it, and there was a study done in Wales of 139 psychiatrists. 17% had been assaulted one or more time over the last year.
Wow.
42% were assaulted more than one time.
Jesus.
And
And
32% were threatened by patients. From 1987 to 1992, over those 5 years, there were 120,000 assaults on psychiatrists. The assault rate for all jobs from 1993 to 1999 was 12.6 per 1,000. The assault rate for
the orderlies or whatever.
for doctors other than psychiatrists, so this is doctors in general, was 16.21 per 1,000. The assault rate for psychiatrists was 68.2 per
68.
1,000.
Wow.
68.
Wow.
So they're getting the crap beat out of them by their own patients.
They kind of deserve it, though. I mean, we can look more at how these things are run, but it is like it's really inhumane how they're. And these are the people that give the orders are the psychiatrists.
Right.
So the inmates have this, deeper hatred for the ones giving the orders than the orderly who might be nice to them every now and again, like, oh, here's your dinner,
Yeah. Well,
whatever.
we got the thing for the orderly too. The assault rate for custodial staff. These are people who work in the psychiatric hospitals around patients all the time.
Right.
They're around these 24 hours. These guys are around patients. 69 per 1,000. So the psychiatrist was 68.2. For people who are around them all the time, it's 69 per 1,000.
Yeah, and they only are there for 20 minutes a month. Yeah.
Right. So the assault rate on psychiatrists is 5.4 times that of workers on all other jobs.
Yeah.
So they're getting the crap beat out of them.
Wow.
And their suicide rate is equal to that of schizophrenics themselves, 3 to 5 times higher than the general population. The psychiatrist suicide rate is right up there with them. And these are the people that run the Western mental health system. They're the chief priests.
Do you think that these priests are also tormented by demons? Do you think that's why they choose to dominate and to do these things?
Well,
I mean, they might not know it. Maybe not. It might not come through as voices.
No, I don't think they come through the way psychotics do. But I think they know that they're really not doing anything to help these people other than
maybe they're just spiritually sick or something. They're not actually afflicted.
I don't know. They're they go into psychiatry. I think a lot of them going, oh, we want to help people, and then they find out these drugs don't help anybody. I mean, they temporarily tamp down symptoms, and that's it. So they're getting paid a lot of money for just prescribing drugs. They're drug pushers for
big pharma.
Big pharma,
right?
And they don't spend time with these people. They just, oh, you feeling this, feeling that? Okay, I'm going to prescribe you this. I'll come back next week and we'll see how you're doing with it.
Right. I've actually got a clip of somebody with a camera going into saying the same. Here, we can watch this here. I want to show this because it's very illustrative of here we go. This person is giving the same symptoms to multiple doctors, and
oh yeah, he's going to get his zoo back.
Right, he's going to get a lot of different responses.
Yeah, and that's common.
Right.
You go from one to the other. You get a different diagnosis almost with everyone.
Exactly. Right. Here's an example. Here.
But by then, 13 years had passed. In this hidden camera footage, a person visited several different psychiatrists, complaining of the same symptoms.
I'm extremely unorganized, and I didn't used to be. It's caused problems in the family. It's caused problems getting, I'm self-employed.
You've got ADD, ADHD, and you're depressed. And your depression is bipolar depressed.
You have a brain chemistry disorder, and it's probably genetic.
This is great.
You have a lot of the symptoms of depression.
So it seems like it is a mixed picture. What that means is like we've got some depressive symptoms and some, high symptoms.
If you're bipolar, I'll need to give you a mood stabilizer. We don't know. I kind of doubt it.
It's considered low-grade bipolar.
You're more of the ADD than ADHD.
And as far as medications for depression, because I would recommend that you start a medication.
Of course.
Which are Prozac, Zoloft, Paxil, Celexa.
Usually Focalin XR is pretty good.
I'll give you some Lexapro in the morning and some Trazodone at night.
Lamictal is a better medication for that. It works in your depression also.
But the treatment for any bipolar cycling is the same.
Yeah.
Lithium,
Remeron is another one.
Trazodone,
Tegretol,
Depakote,
Wellbutrin,
Lexapro,
Lamictal,
Equitro,
Depakote,
Ritalin,
lithium.
Ambien.
You may need
Wow.
an antidepressant also with your Lamictal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Little
That's
example.
what it is. It's like it's like a dartboard. They go, oh, okay, boom.
And the darts they're throwing are huge missiles, like lithium and they're just and it's just destroying.
Lithium can be toxic. I've seen it in the
Right.
prison where, in the summertime you sweat and it increases, your water volume in your body decreases, so the lithium level goes up.
Wow.
I've seen a prisoner almost die because of that.
Jeez. And this is like toxic. It's wow. So could we talk about the methods of, because we were talking a little bit about the drugs. I wanted to, I've got a piece in this where they talk about insulin shock therapy and then metrazole, and then it goes through to electroshock, lobotomy, then thorazine. Would you care to share that here? We can.
Well, what they found is they were looking in the early days. They were looking for anything that would calm these guys down. It didn't matter, So if they could make them sick, if they could make them puke, if they could shock them, if they could traumatize them, and that's what the shock was. It was
right.
They would shock them, and then they're disoriented and dazed for a week, and they don't cause any problems.
Right, and that's what it is. They want them to not cause problems.
They want them to not cause problems and keep them under control. This doesn't cure anything.
Right. It cures the doctor's workload, from having to punch people into submission. Now they can just tie them down and inject them.
That's before they had drugs.
Right, exactly.
So this is what they had before drugs.
Right. And so this is going to start. I've got it starting here with the insulin shock.
New group of procedures that claim to work by creating intentional damage to the brain.
Manfred Sokal had this notion that he could kill just the bad brain cells, that somehow we have good brain cells, we have bad brain cells. So if you give people enough insulin, you kill those bad brain cells. And if the person survived this epilepsy, they would be better off for it.
Despite severe convulsions and an insulin shock death rate of 5%, Sokal pointed to his patient's childlike state and declared his treatment a success. Hospitals built insulin shock wards, and coma therapy became big business. Not to be outdone, Ladislaus von Meduna of Hungary believed he could drive out mental illness by inducing brain-damaging seizures with a drug called metrazole.
He noticed his epileptics had no mental health problems, and his mental health patients, his psychiatric patients, seemed to have no epilepsy, and so he thought doing one would obviate the other.
The theory was that epilepsy and schizophrenia couldn't coexist in the same brain, and that if epilepsy was induced, that a seizure was caused, it would, quote, drive out the schizophrenia. There's no scientific basis for this whatsoever.
Metrazole was fast and lucrative. In a morning, a single psychiatrist could chemically shock 50 patients into a docile and manageable state. By 1939, metrazole was so popular with psychiatrists and staff, it was used in 70% of American hospitals and in almost every other country in the world. The financial success of insulin and metrazole sparked the development of an even more profitable method of inducing brain-damaging convulsions.
How is electric shock therapy done?
We use these electrodes. We place them on the patient's head like this, and then by means of this machine, we pass a controlled electric current through the brain, just for a fraction of a second. The patient doesn't feel it.
It was a lot more than a fraction of a second. I'll tell you that. I've seen this, and it was a lot more than a fraction of a second.
That makes sense. And I'm sure the patient does feel it. You know, I'm sure, like and this is for TV. Oh, just a fraction of a second. Oh.
Behind this miracle cure began in a Roman slaughterhouse.
In Italy, in 1938, two Italian psychiatrists decided to observe that before slaughtering pigs, in order to make the pigs more docile, they would apply electrodes to their temples that were hooked up to wall current, and that this stunned the pigs, but it didn't kill them, and they could then slaughter them. Well, this gave them the encouragement to try inducing convulsions with electricity.
We would see teeth falling out, broken spines, bones knocked out of joint, broken bones, and people even getting internal organ damage from being restrained while they were having these uncontrolled writhing seizures, convulsions.
Many patients have been returned to their homes and jobs who might still be here if it were not for this
What a friggin' joke.
Yeah. Oh,
what
it's a success.
Joke.
What a success.
Golly. Unbelievable. Unfriggin' believable.
I love that we can watch this together. This is great.
Having successfully sold brain damage as a cure, psychiatrists searched for even more precise ways of targeting the brain. This was jump-started in
more precise?
Yeah.
1948, when an explosion blew a steel rod straight through the head of Vermont railway worker Phineas Gage. While Gage survived, his personality was dramatically altered. 70 years later, Portuguese neurologist Igaz Moniz would try to obtain a similar result by drilling into a patient's skull and squirting pure alcohol directly into the brain, killing the tissue of the frontal lobes. Moniz called this new procedure a lobotomy. Dr. Walter J. Freeman would become lobotomy's most infamous practitioner. He discovered he could do it faster, without having to drill through the skull.
There was no anesthesia, and he would just lift up the eye and stick nothing more than an ice pick right into the brain, right under the orbital bone, and then just rake the thing back and forth until he was satisfied that he had caused enough disruption of brain tissue, and then pull it out.
Freeman traveled the country in his lobotomobile.
I can't believe that. Lobotomobile.
Hacking apart his patients' brains on
thousands.
stage.
He treated thousands of people. He went from place to place to place. And, you know, I did get to meet one of these people at the when I was working at the state hospital.
Yes.
And I remember my initial reaction was, he's just not quite human.
Right.
You
the
know,
frontal lobe is what makes us human. Animals have the other brains, but we, you know, like.
It was very strange. It was stranger than any other patient I dealt with. I mean, it just, I'd never seen anything like it, but it was very pronounced. He was very different.
Yeah. Like the ending of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Jack Nicholson was a totally different person, just a vegetable.
Yeah.
And that's what they consider, in quotes, a cure. Right.
Well, you know, it did work for some of the really violent ones.
Yeah.
You know, which maybe that might have been probably the only thing they had, but then it spread to anybody they could get.
Yeah.
You know, they were using it on everybody. This guy was
guy had
traveling around in his vehicle, and he'd done thousands of these.
Yeah, they say that they lined up on the sidewalk,
or sometimes right there in the vehicle.
And he would pull up and offer lobotomies to people, get referrals from the local doctors. Or
just pull up in town. Hey, anybody want a lobotomy?
I'm here.
Wow.
Sometimes people didn't even go through doctors. They'd go right to the lobotomobile, and he would just do the brain damaging procedure right there.
By the time his surgical privileges were revoked after his last patient died on the operating table, Freeman had performed or supervised over 3,500 lobotomies, more than 25% of which, by his own admission, left his patients in a vegetative state.
They lobotomized 1 million people in the 40s and the 50s and beginning of the 60s until they came to the conclusion that this was a destructive treatment.
But though the stories of miraculous cures were soon exposed as brain-damaging frauds, psychiatrists kept one step ahead, inventing new forms of psychosurgery, passed off as medical advances.
I completely shudder from head to toe. And that's what I heard in my head when he drilled something in my brain.
Northwest, actually, of the centre home.
Sorry, I had to do that.
Yeah, why did you have to do that?
I was funny, you know.
Did you?
My head all shook inside.
Oh dear.
Oh, my head shook inside.
Yes, all right.
Everything shook, the eyes, everything, the chest.
Oh, that's wrong.
Oh, that's the wrong one, isn't it? As if damages further. It's just.
Yeah, and they're doing pretty much the same thing now because these antipsychotic drugs rot out the brain.
Right.
It's been proven, and
Yeah.
they're using them still. They're some of the most dangerous drugs used in medical treatment today, and they're just using them, pass them out like candy. Look at all the kids they have on this stuff, and they're not curing anybody of anything. This is their legacy. This is their legacy.
Man.
And these people control the Western Mental Health Center or the system.
I
They
mean,
control them. They're the high priests. Everybody bows down to them. Counselors, psychologists, other doctors. I mean, you can't get another doctor to prescribe psychoactive drugs for you because they don't want to interfere with the psychiatrist domain.
Wow, because it's the
sick.
mafia.
It's just,
right.
yeah, the psychiatric mafia. It's just, it's sick. It's just sick.
Man.
That was grievous bodily harm done to my brain. And nobody has the right anyway to play God with somebody's brain.
The whole operation took about 8.5 hours. And they kept me awake for every second of it. And I remember every second of it. And I still remember it to this day because I have this operation every day of my life. Whether I like it or not, I have it.
Such trauma, like we were saying earlier, how the trauma is. This is infliction of trauma. This poor guy, he remembers it every day of his life.
Yeah, yeah. So they've done more damage than they did good, much more.
Well,
psychiatrists still tout the benefit.
What's that?
I said they're still doing it.
Exactly. Right. That's why we need to have this episode and tell everybody the
Of
truth.
psychosurgery, a treatment that earns them $3.1 million annually. But in the wake of lobotomy's tarnished reputation, psychiatrists were quick to push electroshock back into the spotlight. Renaming it electroconvulsive therapy, they now give patients anesthetics to squash their screams and paralyzing agents to avoid watching the writhing of agony.
We spoke earlier about how it's not just to make them not squirm and make it easier for the people watching. It's obviously so that they don't break their bones.
No, they were breaking bones.
Right.
You know, I watched them do this on a little old lady, and I almost passed out after I walked out of there. I got a pretty strong stomach, but boy, when I turned around to walk out of that ECT thing, I almost fainted. I had to lean against a pillar to keep from falling over.
Oh my God!
It was ugly, you know. And you know, this poor little old lady. I mean, she just. They'd done it to her over and over and over again. She knew the drill. She would come and she'd sit down and just be prepared. They were giving them these muscle relaxers because they were snapping their bones. They were breaking bones while they were being shocked.
I mean, I can't imagine the psychology it takes for the people doing it. Like, we're doing this harm because it's good for them. It's like total opposite of reality.
Well, it did do something.
I know,
you
right?
know,
Right.
like one, it did shock them, so they didn't cause any trouble for a week or 2 weeks. With depression, it would alleviate the depression for a little while,
Right.
maybe a few days or a week or so, or you know,
It helped
very short period of time.
Right. It helped Anand for a few. It helped to calm the voices for him.
Well, in some
testified
cases, it
that.
actually got rid of the voices for a week or so.
Yeah.
I mean, whatever it went. See, this is energy,
Right.
and it impacted them much more than these drugs that they give them. At least they disappeared for a week or so, but they eventually came back.
Right. Because maybe the electrical current affects that energetic realm and their connection.
That's
maybe.
what
I mean, it's all
thought.
speculation, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But I did witness that. They would go away for a brief period of time after those shocks.
Right. So, just to let people know, this this portion that I'm showing is from a Scientologist documentary, and Scientology has their own opinions, but the factual evidence that they're giving are true.
The main misconception that people have about ECT is that it's new and improved. The new and improved refers strictly to these cosmetic improvements because, in fact, they make it easier on the witnesses. The person isn't shaking all over the table.
We already
paralyzed.
debunked that.
It isn't new. It isn't improved. It is worse.
Every 10 years or so, there tends to be, first of all, a denial that it causes any harm. Secondly, an acknowledgement that it might have caused harm, but here's a whole new approach, and now this one is blameless, without any research to back it up.
I mean, they did the same thing when, like, people could tell that morphine was addictive. They were like, "Oh, well, here's this new heroin. It's better. It'll help you to get off your morphine addiction." You know, same thing. That's how they always do it. All of that.
The ECT machine can produce anywhere from 50 to 400 volts. It's the kind of energy that we use for industrial machinery that might be in a steel mill or a printing press, some large piece of machinery. It's an extraordinary amount of energy, and it causes a great deal of damage.
And while stories of prisoners physically mistreated with electroshock are well publicized, the amount of voltage doled out by psychiatrists for ECT is up to 33 times greater. And that damage is most often targeted at the most vulnerable. 2/3 of those who receive electroshock are women, given such diagnoses as premenstrual syndrome, menopausal disorder, or postpartum depression. Half of electroshock patients are elderly. Once they become eligible for government health care at age 65, twice as many American seniors receive ECT than at age 64. And what does this all add up to? 100,000 dead, and countless others so brain damaged they have no hope of ever recovering a normal life. For a total of $12 worth of electricity, psychiatrists in the United States alone rake in $1.2 billion.
Yeah.
But the next miracle cure.
Yeah, you agree with that statement?
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah.
Psychiatrists added to their arsenal made them more money than ever before. For it was faster, cheaper, and could potentially turn men, women, and children into patients for life. By the early 1950s, psychiatrists discovered their next miracle cure. A chemical originally designed to kill parasites in pigs, their new discovery hindered brain function in much the same way as shoving an ice pick into the eye socket. Jesus. It was an old treatment in a new disguise.
With the advent of these new tranquilizing drugs, it seems not too much to say that we're on the verge of an entirely new era in the treatment of mental illness.
Dubbing it a chemical lobotomy, Canadian psychiatrist Heinz Lehmann described Thorazine as a simple, easy-to-take pill with the same effects as psychosurgery, but without the mess.
Thorazine provided psychiatry with the entry into mainstream medicine. It had its magic bullet. If I'm a psychiatrist and I have to spend an hour talking to someone, at psychotherapy, there's only so much I can charge for that hour. But if I can come in, give you a pill, and send you back out in 15 minutes or 10 minutes, that's a much more efficient use of my time monetarily.
What psychiatrists didn't tell the public.
Yeah, and they can bill 1 hour for each one of those 15 minutes, you know, so it's even more money. And then, like, the doctor doesn't even have to go to work, really. He just comes in, for a few hours a day, and he goes home and goes to the golf course or whatever.
Dishing out pills.
Yeah.
Was that Thorazine caused a crippling neurological condition known as tardive dyskinesia.
And that's a neurological syndrome where you have muscle twitches, abnormal jerks, which are uncontrolled, and they either last for a long time or sometimes they're permanent. So that's very clear, very well recognized long-term or permanent brain damage from these medications.
Mr. Blanc has virtually no signs of his original illness now. The signs that the movements of his mouth are completely side effects of the drugs that he was on for 20 years.
So this guy's cured. He has none of his original symptoms.
It doesn't have none of his original brain either.
Right. Yeah, probably.
You know, their brains shrink like walnuts. You know, and this what they do is these tardive dyskinesia symptoms, they give another drug to mask it.
Right.
So the damage continues while they use this other drug. What was it? I forgot the name of Klonopin. They were using Klonopin to mask these symptoms so they could continue to dish out this drug so the patient didn't feel the neurological damage.
So the Klonopin like dulled the neurological firing.
It masked the neurological twitching.
Wow.
So they
just gave him a downer. There's people that do that on the street. Klonopin. It's like Xanax. They take them to get high and shit.
Yeah, they liked it.
But it's like all they do. It's like he's twitching too much. Let's give him a downer. Like that's the logic. That's really wow.
Blount is quite rational. He understands what's going on. And if you're patient, he can carry on a very rational conversation with you.
He's cured.
Even when you remove the drug, it may still remain. It means you have caused a permanent disabling of the brain. In the late 50s, you get the first signs of it, people starting to worry about it. But it's not until the late 70s that psychiatrists start warning their patients about it. 20 years.
And they're still not warning their patients about it. You know, I've never seen them warn their patients about it. And all the years I've worked with them, they won't sit down and say this can cause permanent neurological damage. They say, "Oh, your mouth will get dry. Your vision might get blurred, but it'll improve after a couple of weeks. And you know, if you have any symptoms, let me know." The patient has no idea how dangerous these drugs are with long-term use. And this is brain damage that does not go away. And when researchers started finding this in the autopsies, you know, they saw that the brains of these long-term psychiatric patients were shrunk like walnuts. Yeah. And these are people who weren't under the control of Big Pharma or the psych mafia. They published this stuff and the psychiatric mafia, Big Pharma, went nuts. Oh no, it's not due to schizophrenia. It's not due to our drugs. It's due to the schizophrenia.
Wow.
It's nothing to do with our drugs.
We see that today with how they're doing this, the last 2 years of medical tyranny. It's the same methods. Oh, it's not the cure that we give you, it's because of the original sickness. But that's all coming to light. The truth is being
it came to light there too, and then they published it, and they kept saying, "Oh no, it's not the drug." So they started giving these neuroleptics to monkeys and rats and all kinds of animals, and they were finding the same result.
Right.
So it's
physical damage. Right.
Yep. Yeah. Neurological damage with long-term use.
Wow.
It's
so this
amazing.
Is not informed consent.
No, it's amazing these people aren't getting the crap suit out of them.
Right.
Because it is permanent neurological damage.
Wow.
With long-term use of these drugs. Not in all cases, but in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
Depending on how long you stay on it.
So you're just a slave in their wheel, their conveyor belt of money-making damage to people.
Right.
Like it's
and you go off it. You go psychotic. You know, they bring you back in, they put you on it again, you go off it again. It's just this big
cycle,
money fleecing merry-go-round.
Wow.
You know, kind of powered by big pharma and the psychiatric mafia.
Perfect system for them.
Yeah, nobody's getting cured, and they have to keep coming back to get these toxic drugs over and over again to stay sane because they don't know what else to do.
Because they occult all the other else. You know, people like Mace don't get published into like bigger journals and such.
Right. If Mace was adopted worldwide instead of this crap, the whole planet would be so much better off.
Right.
SmithKline French had good reason to keep a lid on the bad news. In the first year alone, SKF saw a more than 500% return on their original investment. With the public and the press kept in the dark about the severe and disabling side effects, prominent doctors and psychiatrists met in Puerto Rico to lay the groundwork for the expansion of psychiatric drugs far into the future. Psychiatrist Dr. Nathan Klein wrote this in the conference's final report.
The present breadth of drug use may be almost trivial when we compare it to the possible number of chemical substances that will be available for the control of selective aspects of man's life in the year 2000.
Control of selective aspects of man's life.
Yep.
And look at what has happened.
He wasn't kidding.
Yeah. Wow.
Dr. Klein spearheaded a movement flooding new psychiatric wonder drugs onto the global marketplace, backed by a massive publicity machine, spending hundreds of millions of dollars. Psychiatry was now an industry of drug pushers.
Big pharma at use.
Exactly. Now the big pharma has their teeth in there, and this, I think, is what you were talking about before.
With so much money to be made, all psychiatrists needed was a scientific theory to justify it. Their solution? An official report declaring that all mental problems derived from a so-called chemical imbalance in the brain.
Total bullcrap.
Right.
Total
We talked about
bullcrap. Made up deception and lies.
Exactly. Yeah, we talked about it in our first episode together, and yeah.
Requiring drugs to correct.
This chemical imbalance is one of the greatest fallacies ever foisted upon patients and the public. There is no chemical test.
I mean, and you made sense of it, or before you said, well, we give them chemicals and they're healed, so it must be an imbalance of chemicals, like, you know, that,
right. Well,
that type of logic.
Yeah, they're not healed, but they dumb down. It's like pouring you know, honey into a computer or something. You know? it drugs the brain.
Yeah.
You know, but it cures absolutely nothing. And they're not looking for a cure because they've reduced the research monies for schizophrenia down to a mere dribble by lying with the statistics and publishing, you know, false statistics and selectively choosing, you know, partial populations.
Right.
It's just complete deception what they're doing.
Right. Right.
To show an imbalance related to any psychiatric disease.
Like an extreme inner nervous agitation. People describe it as wanting to crawl out of their own skins. And this happens with great frequency, and it is absolutely, totally well understood to be associated with suicide and violence and homicide.
After years of these reported side effects and cases upon cases of violence, self-mutilation, and death, in 1991, health experts, legislators, and the public finally forced the FDA to order an investigation.
I know with absolute certainty that if Charles had any idea of the side effects of Prozac, he would never have taken it.
I had two sons, David Lee, age 8, Billy 16, wife 20 years, all gone. I'll tell you why. After being on Prozac for 21 days, my wife shot and killed both of these two boys right here. She turned the gun to herself and shot herself twice.
I took the 9mm automatic, sat down on the bed and put the gun to my head. And I blew a 4-inch hole out the back of my arm instead of my head. Thank God I was a lousy shot. Had someone looked further into Prozac, steps could have been taken to avoid it.
What was supposed to be an unbiased hearing was a panel of psychiatrists, the vast majority with personal financial ties to pharmaceutical companies.
They basically couldn't find an expert, a doctor, a psychiatrist, at a leading medical school who basically in some way or another didn't have a consulting agreement, hadn't taken money from the pharmaceutical companies.
They're totally captured, right?
Yep, they are. All the way down. The educational institutions, all the way down.
They couldn't find a good guy in the bunch. It was all bad apples.
And it's the same thing with the ones that make the, these psychological disorders.
Right.
They're all captured. They make them up, and the drug companies come and create these toxins behind them.
Yeah, and they repurpose old toxins. Like Thorazine was to kill parasites in pigs, and they're like, oh, it damages their brains. Let's damage humans with it.
Well, it's control and money.
Right. Yeah.
The evidence today that there is credible evidence.
Traumatization and monetization.
And you think this is you think this has stopped them from selling Prozac? No. They're still prescribing it hand over fist.
Right.
Evidence to support a conclusion that antidepressant drugs cause the emergence and or the intensification of suicidality and or other violent behaviors.
He just stated, oh, there's no evidence of that. I was busy stopping and starting it, but he said, yeah, there's no evidence that there's any problem, that it doesn't cause suicidality. Even though he had these testimonies, these people are telling him to his face, hey, it's a problem. And he's like, nope, I don't see that.
Their arrogance is out of this world. It's just like with their chemical imbalance theory.
Right.
It is because they say it is.
Right.
And same with the voices. The voices are hallucinations because we say they're hallucinations. You ask them, well, where's your research? What have you done? Nothing. We say it. So it must be because we're saying it.
Right. Because we are the masters and you are the slaves. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. We're the doctors.
And
you're just the patient. So,
right.
and in our case, you're a crazy patient. So you got nothing to say.
So, and because we deem you crazy, we can put you away for 72 hours just because there's laws
we say
for it.
So.
Yeah. Right.
500 deaths, 33 murder cases, and over 20,000 adverse side effects. Would you like to tell me why this drug is still on the market?
Is there an alliance, an unholy alliance between the psychiatric community, the pharmaceutical industry, and the FDA? And the answer is yes.
This unholy alliance became all too apparent in 1997, when pharmaceutical companies persuaded the FDA to allow them to advertise directly to the public, with psychiatrists providing medical endorsement. And in just 3 years, sales of psychiatric drugs skyrocketed, almost 2.5 times.
And now everything on TV is brought to you by Pfizer. They got it's so immense now.
It is. They bought off Congress. They bought off the Senate. They control the legislature.
Right.
They control doctors. It's out of control. It's friggin' out of control, and it's the people who suffer.
Totally.
When the numbers of violence and suicide victims shot through the roof, public outrage finally forced the FDA to issue warning labels on antidepressants. But by then, 13 years had passed. In this hidden camera footage,
we already saw the hidden camera footage. And I've got a piece at the end here. The kids being drugged in school with ADHD. I don't know if you wanted to talk about that. I've got a couple minutes of that.
Well, I think we kind of covered that.
Right. Okay. And so I'm sure that I wanted to get, just before we go, I just wanted to do one more video that I'm sure you will be happy to see. It's a speech. It's about 9 minutes. Dr. Jeffrey Schaller. SCH.
Yeah, he's one of the few of them out there who's telling the truth. He's actually telling the truth.
That's great. Here, for everyone to hear, I want all the listeners to hear this gentleman.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor to receive this award tonight, named for my dear friend and colleague, Thomas Szasz. As Thomas Szasz wrote years ago, the only true political virtue is obedience to authority, and the only true political sin is independence. Independence renders authority useless, and that is what infuriates it so. You've undoubtedly been told you're mentally ill for daring to say that the emperor called psychiatry has no clothes, not to mention stupid and unscientific. At least this is what some of my colleagues say about me at one university. So if this is something that has happened to you, I'm here to say that you are not alone. The controversy regarding the myth of mental illness and psychiatry is not about science or medicine, it's about power. When psychiatrists start agreeing with you, well then perhaps you ought to reconsider your position. Something may be wrong. So I'd like to say a few disobedient things, which is especially true because I was trained as a psychologist, and when a member of the profession criticizes its own, it's considered especially sacrilegious. What do we know that is true, that the cult of psychiatry keeps telling us is false? First, the idea that there is a known brain lesion causing mental illness. The truth is, we cannot tell who is mentally ill and who is not by looking at pictures of their brains or analyzing their blood. Psychiatrists had to invent their own book of diseases because pathologists would have nothing to do with them. It's called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, the DSM, a great work of fiction. What's the difference? What's the difference between the DSM and a scientific book of disease? Every disorder in the DSM is invented. Every disease listed in a pathology textbook is discovered. Real disease is found in a cadaver at autopsy. Mental illness is not. Mental illness refers to something that a person does. Real disease refers to something that a person has. Consider this yet another way. It takes one person to have a real disease. It takes two people to have a mental illness. If you're alone on an island, you could develop a real disease like cancer or heart disease, but you cannot develop a mental illness such as hyperactivity or schizophrenia. This is because mental illness is always diagnosed on the basis of some sort of social conflict. When people do something that others find objectionable, they can be diagnosed as mentally ill. If the person doing the diagnosing is more powerful than the person diagnosed, then there is trouble. In this sense, the diagnosis of mental illness is always a weapon. Not so when it comes to diagnosing real disease. Think of how, when people get angry with one another, they inevitably resort to some kind of diagnosis. They say, "You're crazy. You're mentally ill. You're paranoid." Can you imagine somebody getting angry with someone and saying, "You have diabetes. You have Parkinson's disease"? Social conflict has nothing to do with developing a real disease. You don't develop diabetes because someone doesn't like the way you think, speak, or behave. You have to have someone else present to judge that your behavior is morally good or bad in order to have a mental illness. So diagnosis is a weapon, a tool people use against one another, especially when there is some kind of power conflict present. And what of treatment? Treatment for mental illness is punishment. Look at our criminal justice system. When someone commits a crime and a psychiatrist is in the courtroom, a defendant may go to a mental institution instead of a prison. Can you imagine a judge saying, I sentence you to treatment for your cancer. I submit to you that psychiatric treatment is worse than prison. For in prison, they don't judge how long people should be deprived of liberty on the basis of what they think about themselves and the world. In a mental institution, of course, this is the case. If you don't think about yourself and the world correctly, you'll be punished longer. Psychiatrists love to say that mental illness is a real disease, just like cancer. The analogy between mental illness and real disease is not reciprocal. It doesn't hold both ways. Having cancer is not like being depressed. We don't shock people who have cancer to make them better, especially if they don't want to be shocked. Consider how melanoma, a deadly form of skin cancer, is a disease here as well as in northern India. If you have melanoma, does it cease to exist if you move to another country, another culture? Of course not. If you're wandering the foothills of the Himalayas and meditating for 15 hours a day, you may very well be called a holy man in India. Take that same person, have him walk across the grounds of the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C., and he's diagnosed a paranoid schizophrenic and committed to a mental hospital. What do you think psychiatrists would do if Jesus were alive today, or Buddha, or Mohammed? Bada bing, right into a mental hospital, injected with drugs to stop their crazy beliefs and speech. Psychiatrists today are the true grand inquisitors. They would crucify the holy men and women of yesterday in an instant. My father was sent from Nazi Germany to America in 1933 when he was about 15 years old. From the time he was sent out of Germany by his family because he was a Jew until his dying day 5 years ago, he had nightmares that the Nazis were persecuting him. He fought against them his whole life, awake and asleep. I used to ask him, Dad, what were people thinking in Germany back then? What were they thinking when they saw the Nazis parading about? And he used to say, nobody took them seriously. Nobody believed they could ever have the power to do what they did. We laughed at them. Now, while I encourage you to laugh in the face of those psychiatrists who argue that 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4, know too that we must also take them seriously, especially when it comes to the harm they have done to people in the name of helping them. For if we do not, history will repeat itself. We are building a resistance to the psychiatric Gestapo. The Citizens Commission on Human Rights is an important partner in the fight for liberty and justice. That is why we are here tonight, and that is why we will be together tomorrow. Thank you.
He's right on.
I just wanted to share that with everybody and you. And when I mentioned him, I'm glad that you recognized it. Oh, Jerry Schaller.
Yeah.
I'm very glad that that you agree with these same.
Oh shoot, he's right on. The thing he doesn't understand is that, you know, schizophrenia is an energetic disease.
Right.
It's a spiritual disease. It's not a physical disease like the psychiatric mafia likes to say.
Right.
So it's kind of like, you know, getting a magnet. The only way you can tell that energy is affecting something, because energy for the most part is invisible, like gravity's invisible,
Right.
electricity's invisible, magnetism's invisible. You know, when you get that magnetic field, you can't see it, you can't sense it, you wouldn't know it was there.
Right.
Unless you got a jar full of iron filings, you put it on it, then now you can see the magnetic field.
Right.
So the same thing is true of schizophrenia. It's an energetic disease. It runs patterns. Those patterns are the iron filings of the magnetic field. Only they're for psychiatry. There's 23 or more individual patterns that the voices run repeatedly from one side of the United States to the other. They're all the same. So that is the iron filings of schizophrenia. It's those behaviors that negative energy is manifesting.
That's how we can see it.
That's how you can see it.
Right. Yeah. And it has to be something independent of each individual because they're all the same pattern. If it was a random problem with somebody's genetics or their wiring of their brain, each one would be different because each person is different. That's a law of nature. We're all different. So it would show up differently in everybody, but here it doesn't. With schizophrenia,
the same patterns that these patients ran when I was at the state hospital in Georgia. The same patterns over here in Arizona, and all the hospitals I worked in, all the mental health centers I worked in the prison. It's the same patterns. And this is an energetic disease. It's not a disease.
Right.
It's a disorder.
Spiritual war.
It's a spiritual warfare.
Yeah. Well, I thank you for being such a warrior and being on the field for all these years. And I mean, your care has led you to learn so much more information that is helping to connect everybody's. We're all trying to piece it together and understand what is this all about and how could this be true? And you've been able to acquire much more information than everybody else because you actually care, and you're amongst all those others that don't. And it's such a stark difference. And we're so glad that you could join us today. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me, because it's people like you that are going to get the truth out. I can't do it by myself.
Well, it's my pleasure because I care as well. And it's so important that we have freedom. Individuals be free. And this domination of others by a control system is the evil that I'm fighting. And this here in the psychiatric realm is just another piece of the big puzzle of dominance and control. And I see it as satanic, and I see it as anti-human, and it bubbles its ugly head all over our society, and psychiatry is a big piece of the puzzle.
It's very, very dangerous. People need to understand what these people are doing.
Yeah.
And they don't. They're backed by the legislature. They're backed by big pharma that has unlimited funding for.
Right.
And they're still pushing the chemical imbalance theory, and their advertisements.
Even though they know it's true,
even though
true.
they knew it was not true when they started it.
Right.
They were aware of it when they started it. They needed some explanation as to why their drugs worked because they had no idea.
Right.
Those drugs
and lying is what they do.
Lying is what they do well.
Yeah. And that Jeffrey Schaller was talking about his father who escaped the Nazis. And those big pharma companies were there too. They were in Nazi Germany, IG Farben and Bayer, and a lot of that is the same. So we got to be aware of what's going on and keep yourself free, and tell your friends not to go get on those neuroleptics. They look into it yourself, like really educate yourself and the others that you care about, because that's how we're going to stay free, because people have to consent. They have to sign themselves in,
They do have their place with the people who are so far out that they're uncontrollable. The violent schizophrenics.
Right.
There's nothing else you can do with them because you can't reach them.
In the old days, they would chain them to the wall.
Right. They chain them to the wall.
Right. Man, it's such an ugly picture, but I thank you so much for shining a light on it with me. Thank you, Jerry. And I would love everybody to please visit jerrymarzinsky.com. And for anybody that is interested in your practice, there are links there to get in contact. That is wonderful. Thank you, Jerry, for that. And I also wanted to tell people to you mentioned 2 books earlier. Energy Over Mind and Causism by John Mace.
By John Mace. They'll talk about this new energetic system that takes into account the energy universe and the spirit, which psychiatry, psychology, and social work don't want anything to do with. And you can't have a cure for an energetic spiritual being without taking these things into account.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you so much. Anyway, I appreciate you sharing your time and your all of your years of experience and your commentary on all these information facts that we're exposing today. Thank you again.
Well, thank you.
Wonderful. Cheers.